Hey there, Half-Life 2 has a big variety of weapons. What if I was to tell you that there used to be a lot more though? Half-Life 2 went through a lot of different beta stages, which led to a ton of cut content which, thanks to leaks and the Raising the Bar book, we thankfully know a lot about today. Today's video is about the cut weapons of Half-Life 2. I'll not only be presenting everything that is known about them, I'll also offer some theories as to where they could have been used, why they were cut, and provide footage of them, either official or recreated. For a bit of context, I hosted an art competition on my Discord where people were challenged with creating artwork for a cut weapon of their choice. If you want to take part in future competitions and have a chance of being in a video of mine, consider joining the Discord. We are a well-moderated, pretty active server and I plan on hosting a game night soon, which will be announced there. Also, unless mentioned otherwise, assume these weapons to be cut during the development of Half-Life 2, not from the episodes. By the way, about 90% of people watching are not subscribed, so if you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the cut weapons. The Hopwire Grenade is a grenade that looks somewhat similar to the Zen grenades found in Half-Life Alyx. It would have functioned pretty differently though. Once thrown, it would leap into the air and shoot out several wires from its holes. If someone or something was to enter those wires, it would cause the grenade to detonate. In the Episode 2 commentary mode, it stated that the Magnuson device, the bombs used to kill the Striders in the Episode 2 finale, started out as this cut weapon.
The Strider Buster, or Magnuson device, started life as a Half-Life 2 weapon called the Hopwire. This was a weapon that would leap into the air and create physical connections via ropes to the surfaces around it. Once attached, the ball would be suspended in the air, ready for action. We never shipped that weapon because it wasn't generally usable enough in our environments, especially outdoors. We returned to the Hopwire for Episode 2, where we thought we could use it to tie the Strider's legs together and make it trip. But the mechanic of hurling and attaching the Strider Buster was more fun for players, so we moved the weapon in that direction.
It was really unstable in the leak and was most likely cut due to technical reasons. OICW stands for Objective Individual Combat Weapon. It's based on the real-life XM29 OICW by Heckler & Koch, a name that will come up a lot in this video. The weapon was to be used by Combine soldiers and by the conscripts, a human Combine workforce that would have become rebels later in the game. The weapon featured a built-in grenade launcher, a big scope and really bad recoil. It was to use medium rounds. These were shared by the AK-47, MP5K and the 9mm pistol, similar to what we got in Half-Life 1 with the pistol and SMG ammo being shared. In the leak files you could also find the texture of the OICW that looked a lot more roughed up. This version was also featured in some screenshots in Raising the Bar. Raising the Bar is shortly put a book about the development of Half-Life 2 in case you are unaware. It ended up becoming the AR2 as we know it today. A fun detail is that the grenade model of the SMG is still called AR2 Grenade, which comes straight from the OICW's grenade launcher. The rebel reload animation of the AR2 is also still the same as that of the OICW in the leak. Binoculars can be found in the Half-Life 2 leak. You could zoom in to 5 times normal sight. According to the leaked source code, there was to be a black mask, a different crosshair and animations for zooming in. None of this can be found in the leaks we got. It eventually ended up being turned into the HEV suit zoom. Unused HUD icons can still be found in the game files. Also, perhaps interesting to note, in the binocular sound folder were some signal noises, garbled voice sounds and an excerpt of a yodeling song. This one to be exact. This song can be heard in this Half-Life 2 beta radio. There really isn't a whole lot known about the energy grenade. We only have this model, which is just half a sphere with a grey transparent texture named S.L.A.M attack noise, or SMAT noise. SMAT noise? On the name alone it sounds like it would most likely have been a Combine weapon, though this is just theorizing. The MP5K was said to be Half-Life 2's main SMG that eventually ended up becoming the MP7, which is why they're mostly similar in pretty much everything. Stats-wise at least. The final MP7 mostly got its looks from the cut MP7, which at some time during development, both the MP7 and MP5K existed side by side, being somewhat fused into the one we eventually got. The MP5K would have been more accurate and had a lower fire rate. It is inspired by the real Heckler & Koch weapon of the same name. The HUD icon, like that of many other cut weapons, can still be found in the retail game, be that with cheats. You probably remember how the citizens in Half-Life 2 receive food packages from Combine dispensers. Well, those food packages are technically weapons. You can give them to yourself using Give Weapon Citizen package. The icon for them will be that of the MP5K. The fan favorite cut weapon, the AK-47, also known as the AR-1 in the leak. The AK had no animations and was carried with only one hand, which I know is just an artifact of it being unfinished, but I like to imagine Gordon just one-handing an AK in combat. The AK was to have a semi-automatic firing mode, a 3 and 5 bullet burst mode and a full auto mode. The AK HUD icon can still be found in the retail files. To criticize the model a bit, it's actually that of an AKM and not an AK-47. It also wrongfully has the bolt and fire mode selector appear on the left side, even though they should be on the right. Even though this is not confirmed, it is suspected that most of the assault rifle-like weapons were cut due to there being too many. There are also a few more later on the list. Also known as the HMG-1, The heavy machine gun was to be the Half-Life 2 version of Counter-Strike's Negath. It would have had high damage but terrible accuracy. This weapon is again inspired by a Heckler & Koch weapon, the GR9. The HMG-1 was to feature an automatic firing mode as well as a 3-round burst mode. In the leak, this was broken and would only consume 1 unit of ammo. The weapon would have also been used by the Combine, as they still feature a firing animation for this weapon in the final game. Even though it is named HMG-1, there is no sign of any HMG-2 ever existing during development. The HMG-1's distinct green look looks a lot more in line with a lot of the cut synth enemies, and some of the retail ones. Part of the reason for it being cut was most likely also due to the needless amount of automatic weapons. Now obviously the stun baton isn't as cut of a weapon as others on this list. It's the melee weapon used by Metro Cops. These can even be picked up by the player, though you don't receive them as a weapon but as 7 HEB suit power units. It is actually a usable weapon in Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, and was originally planned to be one in Half-Life 2 as well, which we know because of both the HUD icon and view model being present in the retail files of Half-Life 2. While I get that it simply would not be needed due to the crowbar existing, which is most likely the reason it was cut, I really would have loved being able to use it. During the development of Half-Life 2, there were plans to start the game on the Borealis. It is most likely that the cut Ice Axe was to be found there as a melee weapon. It would have been pretty much the exact same as the crowbar but with a faster hit speed. The trade-off being that it would have dealt significantly less damage. The HUD icons are once more still found in the retail game. Another remnant being that the crowbar swing sound you know and love is titled Ice Axe Swing 1 in the final game. There is also a chance that it will be returning in Half-Life 2 Episode 3/Half-Life 3, as this concept art for it exists where an unknown character is holding it. S.L.A.M is an acronym for Selectable Lightweight Attack Munition. This weapon was fully cut from Half-Life 2 but later re-added in both Half-Life 2 Deathmatch and Half-Life 2 Survivor, the Japanese arcade game. It had 2 modes, the primary one being to be placed on walls as traps. This is very similar to the trip mines of Half-Life 1. They could also be placed on physics objects, though this would mean that as soon as the object is moved in any way, the S.L.A.M would explode. The secondary fire would function the same as the satchel did in Half-Life 1. You could throw them on the ground and detonate them at will. Shooting them would have detonated them as well. It was probably cut from Half-Life 2 due to being pretty useless, as you would need to know where the enemies are. The art icon can still be found in the final game. The Combine Guard gun was originally intended for the enemy of the same name, the Combine Guard. This character was eventually turned to the Combine Guard we know today. The weapon itself was also to be acquired by the player. It looks somewhat similar to a gunship when looking from above, which probably doesn't mean anything, but I thought I'd mention it anyways. Funnily enough, besides also just generally looking different in the view model, the player also held it straight up upside down in the leak. If this was intended or not is not known. The weapon was to fire the disintegration beam we know today from the Strider. The player could also hurt himself with this. This firing animation looked different for the Combine Guard and the player. The player version has 4 tracer lasers that focus on a target before firing a hit scan beam. And the version of the Combine Guard was to charge an expanding black hole that then shrinks and disappears once the plasma projectile is fired. As so often, the art icon can still be found in the retail files. This weapon was cut alongside the enemy most likely. The MP7 was originally known as SMG2 and looks very similar to the retail SMG we got. It is inspired by the real-life MP7 of Heckler & Koch. This weapon had a 60-round magazine compared to the 45 of the retail SMG. The leaked version is also missing the grenade launcher. Otherwise, the weapon seems to be what turned to the final SMG we know, combined with the grenade launcher of the OICW. The HUD icon of the MP7 can still be found in the retail files. To start off, this is not talking about the Manhack as we know it in retail Half-Life 2. Now, while the Manhack weapon may look like a shuriken of sorts, its purpose was a lot different. During the development of Half-Life 2, there was originally to be a Manhack arcade. You had to see people playing on this Manhack arcade similar as to what you would see in any old arcade. The only game they'd be playing was Hackman, a game with cheap graphics featuring a first-person view of a Manhack where you have to hunt people down. You could hear them scream and the screen would fill with blood before you got to play your next Manhack. Unbeknownst to the players of the arcade, they were controlling a real Manhack and hunting real fugitive citizens. Gon was to be able to play that as well, and the weapon Manhack was to be the first-person view model of a Manhack. There is a video created by Loxotron on YouTube that somewhat restores the functionality of it. This was cut alongside the Manhack arcade concept, due to it being overly complex and not very fun. The Tau Cannon is a fan favorite of Half-Life 1, and it did make a return in Half-Life 2, just as the weapon on the buggy, something that I myself only learned after like 10 playthroughs, alongside the fact you could actually charge it up and not just spam fire it. Well, as you might have guessed it, originally the Tau Cannon was set to return as a weapon that could be used by the player. There was to be a citizen in Vortex that would remove the Tau Cannon from the buggy after it was no longer needed at Lighthouse Point, handing it to the player. This was seemingly cut pretty late into development, as there are a ton of leftover files pointing towards this. We for one have the unused script Tau removal in the level editor, which even mentions a Vortex to use. Speaking of which, we also have leftover animations on both the Vortex and the buggy itself. An unused sound clip called Get Tau Off
We'll get that weapon off the car for you, but you're gonna have to continue on foot.
We'll get that weapon off the car for you, but you're gonna have to continue on foot.
Unused closed captions and of course, the unused HUD file. Fun fact, this HUD icon was later reused for Garry's Mod's Physgun. The Tau cannon was most likely cut due to being somewhat similar to the AR-2 in terms of playstyle. Spam fire with a heavy damage charge-up secondary fire. The fire extinguisher was to be found in the Cat Borealis chapter of Half-Life 2, where it could be used to extinguish fires that were in the way of the player. In the leak, the weapon itself was functional. It was missing animations and effects though. Here's what it could have looked like. Funnily enough, this is one of the cases where there is no leftover HUD file. It was most likely cut due to being too limited of a use case. Perhaps we'll see it make a return in episode 3 on the Borealis. If you have seen my cut enemies and characters videos, this one will seem familiar. This is both an NPC and a weapon. Sort of maybe. The HK707 is a static weapon, the model of which can be found in the beta files. At one point in Half-Life 2, Gordon was to maneuver missiles around certain areas, in which the HK707 would have been defenses the player would need to avoid or destroy, given that it has a GIP version. It's unknown whether these would have been operated by an NPC or if they would have been automatic. They do have handles on the back though. They are most likely meant to be a fictional Heckler & Koch weapon, given their name starting with HK. Also, this NPC still exists in Hammer for Half-Life 2, Hammer being the level editor for Source games. The NPC has the entity name of NPC Missile Defense. It simply generates an error when trying to use it though. So depending on if an NPC was to control this weapon or not, this could be classified as a weapon. The Desert Launcher was to be a 12 cannon combine mortar. It is once more a grey area on if this is really to be considered a weapon in Half-Life 2. This is basically just an entity that the player was, most likely, not to use themselves. The Brickbat would allow the player to use a small selection of props as weapons by picking them up on the ground and throwing them at enemies. There are at least 4 normal elements available for pickup. Rocks, beer bottles, cremator heads and flat head crabs. The cremators are a fan favorite cut enemy of Half-Life 2 that almost made it into Half-Life Alyx. And did actually make it into Half-Life 2. Somewhat. You can find her head in Eli's lab, to which he'll comment,
Alyx brings in the strangest things.
This same head was to be throwable. The fast headcrab you could pick up would behave similarly to the Snarks of Half-Life 1. Also to note, while this is the fast headcrab as we know today, there is a lot speaking towards the fact that the fast headcrab was to be the main headcrab of Half-Life 2, mainly because the fast headcrab's model is simply called headcrab, and the normal headcrab's one being headcrab classic. Back to the Brickbat though. There is evidence that citizens would be able to use the Brickbat as well, mainly rocks and cremator heads, which would have happened at the cut combine factories. The Hammer level editor also still shows the weapon choices. Beer Bottle and Beer Bottle 2 for citizens. You can also still find the weapon Brickbat with 4 choices in Hammer. The Brickbat was unfinished and likely just a test weapon that most likely ended up being removed because the gravity gun took its place. This weapon also has no leftover HUD element. It almost ended up having its code reused in the final game in the Molotov Cocktail, which I'll get to now. The Molotov Cocktail is a weapon just like you'd expect it. When thrown, it produces a ring of fire that stays a bit before extinguishing. It was originally used by the citizens against combined forces in their test level, Get Your Free TVs. It was to be part of the Brickbat's pick-upable props, which is also why it has the headcrab model when spawned in the leak and a Snark HUD icon. The Molotov was also included in Half-Life 2 Survivor, though it could only be obtained with cheats. There, it has a grenade view model and a ferropod HUD icon. The fire did however functionally deal damage, which it did not do in the leak. The unused HUD icon is still included in the retail files once more. The portable Thumper was to be a Thumper but portable. What a surprise, right? In the Half-Life 2 leak, the model for it is a yellow fire hydrant, which very most likely is a placeholder. The player was to carry one of these at all times and could place it on the ground to scare off antlions. There is also a model of a heavy version of it found in the leak files, but it went fully unused. The sticky launcher simply looked like a piston in the leak. It functionally was pretty similar to the satchel charge or cut S.L.A.M. You were able to shoot out bombs using left click and then detonate them using right click. These would stick to enemies. Given that its view model looked like the pistol and the bombs looked like this, it is most likely that it was cut pretty quickly. I can't help but imagine how fun this weapon could have been in tight corridors, say a chapter like Nova Prospect. This weapon has no HUD icon, as it doesn't even have its own model. The socket wrench has close to no info. The promotional artwork for Half-Life 2 shows Alyx wielding a unique melee weapon, a socket wrench. The weapon would have been in line with her character being more of a tinkering mechanic. To quote game designer Darby Eng in a tweet from 2020, there was a desire to give her an iconic weapon like Gordon's crowbar, and so the socket wrench was aimed towards that. We never followed through on making it a thing for her in the game though, so it was born and died here in this image. She did end up receiving her own unique weapon of course, the Alyx Gun. Speaking of which, in the leaked version of Half-Life 2 and also the retail version, the Alyx Gun can be spawned and used by the player. The view model is completely broken and no ammo exists for it. It seems to imply though that Gordon was able to wield this weapon at one point. Also, taking a look at the Alyx Gun animations, it seems originally the weapon could be converted to an AR. Also, one of my favorite fun facts, on the elevator right down at Eli's lab, this NPC is seen wielding an Alyx Gun. The only person we ever see in a Half-Life game other than Alyx to wield the Alyx Gun. Well, besides Russell for a short second.
Don't worry, it's unloaded. It's unloaded! it now!
There are also commands for setting the max ammo for it, which also furthermore hint towards the idea of it being a weapon the player was supposed to wield at one point. Evidence for this is very thin though. I think the cut weapon aspect of this rather lies in the AR version of it. And hey, obviously to mention, the Alyx Gun did make a return on Half-Life Alyx as a usable weapon. It's only speculated what the roller wand entails. It is likely that it will allow the player to control roller mines in one way or another, most likely already reprogrammed ones. Since there is this line in the leaked game files, weapon that lets the player control the roller body. Roller body most likely referring to a friendly roller mine. It could thus also function as Dog's Hand in the fetching game. It could also be a predecessor to Alyx's preferred method of hacking roller mines, eventually being swapped out for a multi-tool. The roller wand in the leak uses the S.L.A.M model as a placeholder. The Vortex Hopwire is better known as the Hopwire Grenade because it does pretty much just that. It sucks in everything around it and disintegrates it. It was cut from Half-Life 2 Episode 1, and it was highly unstable during development, pretty much crashing the game whenever used. This weapon actually still exists in Portal 1, where it can be cheated by entering GIF weapon Hopwire in console, though it doesn't really do anything except spawn a roller mine probe. The way it was supposed to look is very similar to the Strider cannon firing. Speaking of Striders, it was most likely to be used against them, as suggested by the console commands Hopwire Strider hits and Hopwire Strider kill dist. It interestingly would also only be given to the player once per playthrough, save file or per chapter. The maximum limit varied from 1 to 3 depending on the map. As this weapon had no view model and is horribly broken in tons of aspects, it was probably cut early. We know basically nothing about the pulse shield. We only have this HUD icon showing nothing but its name. We can only speculate what this would have been. Though perhaps it would have been something similar to the pulse shield we would eventually see in Half-Life Alyx's charger enemy. This weapon isn't actually cut. By entering GIF weapon Cubemap in console, you can still receive it. This weapon was used to test different shaders' reflections using the nearest Cubemap. To explain what Cubemaps are, Cubemaps would be placed in the level editor. They would then take 360 images of the area and project those on whatever nearby reflective object there was. The most popular case of this being the crossbow in Half-Life 2. Whatever Cubemap the player stood closest to would be the one that gets projected. You can especially see this in certain areas where you are at the border of two different Cubemaps. This was a great way to do reflections back then that didn't cause a big strain on old systems. But yeah, not much of a cut weapon, barely even a weapon at all really. The sniper was to be the main long-range weapon, which ended up getting replaced by the crossbow. It had a long reload time between shots, though its bullets would instantly hit a target. The Overwatch sniper rifle ended up staying in the game, looking quite a bit different than the beta one Gordon was supposed to wield. Half-Life 2 Survivor, however, does feature a sniper, looking very similar to the leaked model. That icon for it can still be found in the files. You are also able to spawn the sniper ammo in the retail game by typing GIF item box S rounds, which will spawn this box. The sniper was most likely cut to make room for the more creative weapon of the crossbow, though exact reasons are unknown. This entry isn't as interesting as others. Basically, in the leaked version of Half-Life 2, the shotgun had a completely different model and different firing sounds. These sounds are still in the retail files. This old model still appears as a DirectX 7 model in the game, which basically just means it looks cheaper on older systems. The missile launcher is exactly what you would expect. Besides the different names seen on the HUD icon and the changed model, it is unknown what made this weapon different from the final RPG. The appearance of it is similar to that of the FIM-92 Stinger. It does have some more leftover content in the game. The missile launcher was named ML Grenade, which the RPG ammo is still called in the retail game. ML of course standing for missile launcher. The sound file used for the APC missiles is called Stinger Fire 1, which most likely originated from the missile launcher. The Incendiary Rifle, also known as I-Rifle, doesn't even have its own model, instead looking like the AR-2. The I-Rifle is essentially a multi-shot flare gun with 5 rounds per magazine. If a flare hits a target, it will be set on fire. The flares don't really have that much range. This weapon was also seen in the E3 2003 video, Tunnels. The flare box can still be found in the files alongside its HUD icon, though that is because it is identical to the AR-2. Speaking of flare guns, the flare gun is a weapon used by Metro Cops, Combined Soldiers and the Nova Prospect prison guards in the retail game, though the weapon itself is only implied, never actually seen. It was originally intended to be used by the player. There is a HUD icon and a weapon in the Half-Life 2 leak. The weapon could be used to ignite targets. It was to be found in the Arctic levels, namely the Borealis and Kraken base, another cut chapter of Half-Life 2. They would be stored in pyrotechnic lockers. This texture still exists in the game. The Immolator was to be used by the cremator and eventually the player. It would function similar to a flamethrower, except that it would fire a green beam that fully disintegrates organic matter. The cremator would use this weapon to clean up the streets of dead bodies. The Strider's main weapon of attack was originally a giant Immolator as well, with some source code and console commands pointing towards this. This was later replaced by the attacks of the Combine Guard gun. The Immolator was cut alongside the cremator. Before we get to the final real entry, here are 3 quick honorable mentions that all relate to NPCs, compacted into one entry. The weapon Citizen Suitcase is another cut weapon. It's only meant for citizens, and you do see it in the game in the beginning, but instead of it being a choosable weapon for them, you have to type it in manually in the editor, which makes it somewhat of a cut weapon. The player can also cheat this weapon, though it doesn't do anything. The other one is the Mad Pipe. You see it used by Manhack Matt and Eli for a short second. The Eli one is just a dynamic prop with an animation. The Manhack Matt one, however, is an actual functional one. It is, however, not an actual weapon. Let me explain. Usually the hammer editor is pretty streamlined. There are, however, some small things that are hard-coded into the engine that use very non-conventional methods. The pipe that Matt uses is one of them. Matt is equipped with a crowbar in the editor, with no mention of the pipe to be found. The pipe he's wielding and using in the game is achieved by using the hard-coded method of naming the citizen that uses it, Matt. If you name an NPC citizen Matt, and give them a crowbar in Half-Life 2, it would instead be the pipe. A fun little fact that probably none of you care about. The Half-Life wiki mentions that the pipe was at one point to be usable by the player. I couldn't find any source on this, and the Half-Life wiki itself is really not to be trusted, so take that with a huge grain of salt. In case you're wondering, the Common Over wiki is the reliable Half-Life wiki. I'll also mention Annabelle here, even though there is zero evidence pointing towards it ever being intended to be used by the player, even if it is a usable weapon for a short time in the popular beta recreation mod Raising the Bar Redux. The only thing that perhaps leads one to believe it was planned to be usable at one point is the fact that you can pick it up from Grigori if he dies for a brief moment, and that you can cheat it. It has a very broken view model, but does actually work. But yeah, I wouldn't call the Annabelle a cut weapon really, but I wanted to get ahead of people commenting about it. Okay, now for the final weapon on the list. The Physgun really doesn't need much of an introduction. If you've ever played Garry's mod, it's that. The beam would, however, behave a lot more sluggish, not quite as instantaneous as the one in Gmod does. The most popular use case of this weapon was during the E3 physics demonstration. The beam was also able to kill enemies and allies. The secondary fire is a bit different than the one from Gmod as well, which fired sticky bombs like balls. These could be used to weld 2 props together. In a later interview with Retro Gamer magazine, David Sparer, who was and still is one of the game designers at Valve, would go on to state that the Physgun was initially just an in-game tool built by Jay Stelly, another developer, to test props and their physics interactions. This Physgun HUD icon is still in the retail files, though it does look a lot different than the weapon itself. There is also this early leaked view model that was leaked in the recent repo leak, which looks a bit more in line with the HUD icon. Eventually, the Physgun became the gravity gun. This concludes all the cut weapons. Shout out to the Common Over wiki for basically all the info in this video. Don't forget to let me know what your favorite cut weapon is in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and to join the Discord. And yeah, otherwise, thank you for watching. Dein Ernst?